This AIN video is brought to you by Bombardier.
Hello. The business aviation sector has now been dealing with the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic for just over 6 months. As things stand, the industry seems resigned to having to deal with it for some time to come, with no certainty as to when a vaccine will be universally available and how business and private travel may shift in terms of demand over the coming months. And today I'm joined once again by Richard Koe, Managing Director of Specialist Data Analyst WingX, which tracks flight data to provide an accurate picture of what's happening around the world. So thanks for joining us again, Richard. And the last time we spoke was back in June. And at that time, at least in Europe and North America, there seemed to be hope that maybe the summer months might bring some recovery in traffic. So let's try and get an overview of where things stand now, especially that we're back in the autumn when business travel might normally be beginning to peak again. You track flight data around the world. What are the latest numbers telling us? I think this week you reported that business jet and turboprop activity is around 19% down on where it stood this time last year. In a way, that doesn't sound too bad, but what's your view?
Yeah, good morning, Charles. And it's really been an interesting narrative since we last spoke in June. The way it's played out is in April, May and June, we saw initially a 75% drop, then a 50% drop, then a 30% drop. We did indeed during the summer see a pretty strong recovery, really getting close to normal in the US in July. That is pretty close to July 2019. And in August 2020 in Europe, we actually saw more activity than in August 2019. The way that played out globally was around 15%, 15 to 20% decline year on year through that period, July, August, September. So now we've hit October, and the market is softening, as you've just said. Over the last 6 weeks, measured by flight sectors, we're down by just under 20%.
Yes.
That's the current status.
And do you see much variation around the world? Obviously, we've observed before that COVID, it sort of spreads geographically in different ways and at different times. Do we see a lot of fluctuation? Yeah,
we're seeing a lot of variation, and that's a really interesting part of the story. I just might mention first that to put that 19% decline in some context, scheduled aviation activity over the same period, so put the commercial airlines in there, those sectors are down by over 50%, so close to 55%. So business aviation as a whole is looking pretty robust at 19% down. We never thought we'd say that, but yes, as you say, there's a lot of variation across different regions. Now in Asia, and I'm just taking the last 6-week period, we're seeing pretty close to normal actually. Couple of points down on the same 6 weeks in 2019. Over the year, Asia is down about 15%. So that's been the region that's really been most robust. The weakest region at the moment is Latin America, and that that really aligns with where they are with the pandemic. Yeah. Business aviation flight activity is down by over 30%. In the last 6 weeks. Now, Europe is relatively strong. In the last 6 weeks, Europe is hanging in there at about 10% below normal. But that's softening because August and September, as I said, August was really strong. September weakened a bit, and October is seeing more weakening. Now, the US is behind the curve in terms of the pandemic, and it is beginning to open up. Some states are opening up. So there's even a lot of variability within the US, but the US as a whole down by 16 or 17% over the last 6 weeks. So you can see there, a lot of variability.
Yeah, absolutely. And is the same true with different categories of aircraft? Are there fluctuations on that level?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a common theme globally has been that large cabin aircraft have seen a much bigger hit. They've been much more idle over the period. And if you look back March through October, you've got 40 or 50% declines depending on which aircraft type you're looking at in a heavy and ultra long range bracket. Whereas the light jets over that period have been down by about 20%, and they've really picked up actually in the last couple of months. I mean, if you look at picked lots of anecdotal examples, but the PC-12 right at the kind of entry level is really seeing more activity in the late summer period, coming even into the end of September, than in 2019. So it's a very different story depending on where you look in the fleet.
Yes, good point. Now, going back for several months into the summer, a big part of the overall uncertainty were the rapidly changing restrictions in different places in terms of, what quarantine requirements might be in place, what sort of restrictions might there be. And, the overall message you get on a personal level, it still is sort of don't go making any plans because, you could find doors shutting in your face. And yet business aviation, in a way, offers greater flexibility than the airlines in that respect. You can change your plans. Is it still mainly these factors, changing government restrictions, changing requirements that are sort of dictating the pace and the pattern of how things play out? Or is it more business conditions, or at least as much overall business conditions?
Yeah, no, I would say the interventions by governments have undoubtedly had a very direct influence on the pattern of all travel, but also including business aviation. I mean, if you look in the US, Florida has hit a lot of headlines by opening up. I think it's opened up twice now, but in both phases of its opening up and now in the current opening up, we can see really quite strong flight activity, whereas California, Texas, where that's happened a lot slower, and particularly on the northeast coast, business aviation likewise has been really held back. And in Europe, we've seen UK, Spain, France having major concerns around the second wave, reimposing a lot of restrictions. There are quite tight quarantines there. Business aviation, to the extent that it recovered in the summer, has been pretty much flattened. Whereas, what you're seeing in other parts of Europe and indeed other parts of the world is a lot of domestic travel where those quarantine restrictions are less severe. That's a lot more robust. I mean, flying within Turkey and Russia is actually up compared to same period last year. And China, which hasn't had a coronavirus case in 6 weeks, is seeing more traffic than last year, more business aviation traffic than last year.
Yes, very good point. Now, in the early stages of this crisis, I remember people at the European Business Aviation Association essentially saying that they thought the industry would be able to sustain itself, through the summer, perhaps even into the autumn, but that if this carries on, into the coming winter, unfortunately, it would likely result in some businesses failing. I think they meant, charter businesses, for instance. Do you feel we may be approaching that point? Do you feel that the industry in its current shape and form can't just sort of keep lurching from one week to another, hoping there's enough work to go around?
Well, undoubtedly, some players are going to be more vulnerable than others. I mean, in the airline market, the airlines are severely exposed, and I think there's a kind of 6-month runway of cash, on average for the airlines, and they're gonna hit the end of that runway, especially as the sort of the government subsidies start to run out at the end of October. And airline-like companies in our sector will be facing the same sort of pressure. That is, large fleets which are sort of dedicated to third-party utilization, and clearly, if the market's down by 20% and slipping, and it's been really bad since April, that's really going to hurt. Then there'll be other players in our market that have more flexibility. I mean, if you look at charter brokers, they're pretty light on operating costs. They can adapt. They can look at other luxury sectors and survive. And that said, some charter companies, overall, charter has been buoyant. Some charter companies are actually looking pretty strong in terms of flight activity. So it's not all grim, even in the charter business.
True.
If you look at the fuel business, they're pretty heavily exposed, aren't they? Because it's not just the lack of activity, but it's also the lighter aircraft, the shorter sectors. They're going to be feeling the pressure. Same with FBOs, same with MROs, where it's really kind of utilization is driving their business. So it's a varied picture.
Yes, no, I'm quite sure, and of course that's a good reminder. This really is a food chain, and the whole can't really be healthy if there are weak points in there. You must talk to companies all the time. Have you noticed any sort of shift in their perspective? Whereas, 6 months ago, they might have been trying to project far ahead and saying, well, by next spring, things will be fine. Are they now perhaps looking at it and thinking, well, who knows what's going to happen next spring? Let's just try and get through the rest of this month and then try and get through the month after that.
Yeah, I think you could definitely characterize the current sentiment as how do we weather the storm? Mm-hmm. I think everybody is aware that Q4 is going to be really difficult. Why? Because the corporate business is not coming back in the short term. The leisure business, has run out of gas, even if the quarantines weren't there, because, the summer period is over. And it's really going to be a struggle for survival, certainly weathering the storm over Q4 and probably Q1.
Yeah. There's no dressing that up. But as ever, the reality is projected in the data that you provide at WingX, and I'm sure that's very useful for people trying to make sense of this really pretty unenviable situation that we're all in together. Richard, thanks so much for joining us. It's always good to get your perspective, and if we may, we'll catch up with you again in a few more weeks and months, and let's hope for more glad tidings around that time.
Exactly, Gus. Thank you very much.
Great to chat.
Thanks for watching this AIN video. Please like, subscribe, and share it if you've enjoyed it. Also, visit AINonline.com for all the latest on the aviation industry.